I'm going to be bold and introduce our next speaker. Let's have a look at our program. Mr. Mr Ramovha is the Director of Science Promotion in the Department of Science and Innovation. His work portfolio includes school-based science engagement that encompasses the STEMI Olympiads and competitions. And today, Mr. Ramovha will be talking about issues of transformation and inclusivity and how it relates to STEMI Olympiads and competitions in our country, and how we can ensure that these issues are anchored in our deliberations over the next 2.5 days. So of course, having Olympiads and competitions is wonderful, but it needs to be open to all. And I think that this is an important topic, an important discussion, and I look forward to hearing what Mr. Ramovha has to say. So Isaac, I hand over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I will be talking to you about transformation in STEMI Olympiads and competitions, of course, including inclusivity. There is always a very fine line between transformation and inclusivity, because the manner in which we try to tackle them, it's a collective approach. I will deal with the purpose of this presentation and also try to define transformation and inclusivity, why transformation and inclusivity do matter, and also then look at the transformation and inclusivity levers as well as the associated developmental outcomes. And then try to answer the two questions towards the end. Firstly, who should be the champion of transformation and inclusivity? And lastly, how do we go forward from here? Why this presentation? The intention is to inculcate consciousness of transformation and inclusivity in stakeholders and role players in STEMI Olympiads and competitions. So in a way, we intend to inculcate this consciousness in all of you who are in this conference today. Now, how do we understand transformation and inclusivity? Transformation is about changing the nature or face of things. And of course, there would always be compelling circumstances for the change to happen. And furthermore, inclusivity is about accommodating groups that were traditionally excluded. And let us look at why in our own situation in South Africa, transformation matters. We are not a nation without a background, and ours is characterized by discrimination against certain sections of the population based on race and gender. And that has imposed big work on us towards reversing the impact of that past discrimination, because we have to bring those disadvantaged sections of the population on par with those who were advantaged in the past. What is the issue with inclusivity? We have learners with disabilities who are usually forgotten, neglected, or excluded. We are not sure whether it happens intentionally or it's out of being used to do so in the past. But this is exactly what is happening. And secondly, as a country, we face persistent current challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And they collectively or individually hinder learners' participation in STEMI Olympiads and competitions. For instance, poverty-stricken learners may not be able to fund their enrollment fees, or they may struggle to have money to pay for transport to venues where these competitions are being hosted. Unequal access to resources such as connectivity, mentorship, and coaching also impede learners' participation in STEMI Olympiads and competitions. As you are aware, we are currently living in a totally changed environment because of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we largely have to resort to online activities, with some of the learners living under poverty conditions, also living in areas that are under-resourced and don't have mobile phone services. They cannot, as a result, participate. And obviously this would be aggravated by very high unemployment that we are experiencing in the country. Now, in order to respond to the transformation and inclusivity needs, obviously we would need to look at what could be the levers. But in doing so, we also need to be guided by the developmental outcomes associated with each lever. And I have identified a few here, which I consider to be very, very, very key. The first lever is to increase participation of girl learners, simply because when we talk about gender discrimination in the past, the discrimination was against females. Therefore, to reverse that, we would need to have a special focus on girl learners. And the developmental outcome associated with that would be to enhance gender equality in STEM workforce. This is based on the understanding that STEMI Olympiads and related competitions serve as tools to help us identify learners with talent and potential, who, if well nurtured, would become the future scientists. Hence, the developmental outcome is associated with enhancing gender equality in STEM workforce. Secondly, we need to maximize participation of quintiles 1 to 3 schools. Currently, when we analyze the data, we find out that participation is mainly from independent schools and quintiles into 4 to 5 schools. We need to pay much more attention and direct more resources to maximize the participation of quintiles 1 to 3. And that would help us in fast-tracking the catch-up between disadvantaged and advantaged learners. We say so because the categorization of these schools by the Department of Basic Education took into consideration the socio-economic conditions of the communities where those schools are located. The third lever is alignment with school administration boundaries. for proper administration, the Department of Basic Education has demarcated the boundaries. We know there are school districts, we know there are circuits, there are also provincial departments of education. We need to organize our work in such a way that is aligned to the existing school administration boundaries. And that would help us achieve a balanced access and geographic coverage. We won't be found wanting in terms of having left out certain sections of society. We also need to have a government-based development support that is provided to organizers of STEMI Olympiads and competitions. Of course, to enable them to expand their reach in a way that I've just alluded to, which would be aligned to the school administration boundaries. And in a way that would help us mitigate inequality and effects of poverty and unemployment. Those factors that hampers the participation of learners, particularly those from disadvantaged communities, those that are stricken by poverty, those that are from unemployed parents, and those that are located in under-resourced areas would, through a government-based support, be able to participate. Earlier on, you heard about the framework, the development and support framework for STEMI Olympiads and competitions that will be tabled for adoption in this conference. It is meant to exactly fulfill this role. Now, there is a need to align our work with the country's inclusive education policy by the Department of Basic Education. And if we do that, because it has been developed with the intention of making sure that learners from various backgrounds are accommodated, then our work will also be able to accommodate learners from all the backgrounds. We need to recognize the country's language diversity, and that would help us maximize the participation and ultimately the impact of STEMI Olympiads and competitions. If Olympiads and related competitions are intended to help us identify their hidden talent and potential, there is no need to conduct all the STEMI Olympiads and competitions in English or in Afrikaans. The same results could still be achieved if other languages are used. And the understanding here is that there would be more participation, because even those learners who are less confident in English as a medium of instruction or in Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, they would feel accommodated and feel encouraged to participate. And lastly, the integration of indigenous knowledge systems. I guess you might have picked up from our guest speaker's presentation, where the have been use of some of the indigenous products like baskets. This is something that if we could embrace in the form of embracing indigenous knowledge as a basis of promoting science in general, but also as a basis of getting learners develop the skills that are needed for the problem-solving environment, and also for the environment that requires creativity and innovativeness. We don't hear much about ethnomathematics. We don't hear much about ethnobotany. We need to rethink our approach, taking into consideration how the interfacing of indigenous knowledge systems and the Western science could encourage participation by creating research and problem-solving opportunities that are centered on culturally relevant elements in learners' communities. And this is very much relevant for science fair projects that are primarily featured in the ISCOM Expo for Young Scientists. But the one would also urge the South African Math Foundation to also look at the role of ethnomathematics in this South African Science Math Olympiad and related competitions. So this is a it's a low-hanging fruit that we don't seem to be picking up and taking advantage of it. More so because as South Africa, being part of the African continent, which is very advanced and rich in indigenous knowledge, we should be using this as an effective springboard. Now, let's start with the last two questions to conclude my presentation. The first question is, who should champion transformation and inclusivity? And the answer here is simple. It's all stakeholders and role players in STEMI Olympiads and competitions. Most of us who are in this conference are here because we are either stakeholders or role players in STEMI Olympiads and related competitions. It means that we need to declare ourselves as champions of transformation and inclusivity. We are the ones who need to develop this much required consciousness about transformation and inclusivity, and make sure that in whatever contribution we make to STEMI Olympiads and competitions, we need to ask ourselves how in our work we are responding to transformation issues. And lastly, how do we take these issues of transformation and inclusivity forward? As the department whose role is to create an enabling environment, we are taking it upon ourselves to facilitate a process towards the adoption of a transformation charter for STEMI Olympiads and competitions. We intend to make sure that come the next conference, we will be presenting to you a transformation charter. And we also hope that since the conference won't be happening next year, but a year after, we would also be reporting to you the extent to which we have assisted the community to start responding to that transformation charter. On that note, I've ended my presentation, and I thank you for listening to me. Bye.